In this video, we review materials used in Seattle Public Schools as part of their gender identity education. The same or similar materials are likely being used throughout Washington State, across the U.S., and around the world. We, the makers of this video, are on the left end of the political spectrum. We strongly support sex education and gay rights. We strenuously fight sexist stereotypes and gender oppression. We support civil and human rights for all, including trans-identifying people. We are making this video because we are appalled by what is being taught in our schools. A thin veneer of pseudoscience is being used to indoctrinate children with an ideology based in scientific and medical inaccuracies. While claiming to advance civil rights, schools are directly fueling homophobia, sexism, and authoritarian suppression of speech. While claiming to protect children and help them thrive, they are funneling the most vulnerable into a medical scandal of enormous proportions. And they are teaching all children that self-fulfillment and societal freedom are achieved through identity-focused pronouncements and rituals.
Gender identity education starts early. Teachers are told to read the book Introducing Teddy at the beginning of the kindergarten school year and to revisit the book over the course of the year. Introducing Teddy features a teddy bear named Thomas, who tells his human friend Errol, "In my heart, I've always known that I'm a girl Teddy, not a boy Teddy. I wish my name was Tilly, not Thomas." Errol immediately starts calling the bear Tilly and using the pronoun she instead of he. This makes the bear happy. The teddy bear, who like most teddies is naked, has no sexual characteristics whatsoever. Who could possibly object to calling it a girl as opposed to a boy? But the point of the story is not that sexless stuffed animals should be able to choose whether to be boys or girls. It is that human children can and should decide which sex they are without regard to their very real physical anatomy. As the back cover of the book explains, girl or boy, only you know who you are on the inside. Introducing Teddy also delivers a subtle sexist message. "I've always wanted a bow instead of a bow tie," Tilly says. Kindergartners will wonder why the teddy bear didn't put the bow on its head when he was Thomas. The answer they will likely come away with is this: if you want to wear a bow in your hair, you've got to be a girl.
If some kindergarten teachers fail to inform their young charges that they can declare their own sex just like the teddy bear does, by first or second grade, the school system makes sure those children get the message loud and clear. The book, A House for Everyone, is read to students in those grades. It introduces various characters, including Tom. When he was born, everyone thought he was a girl. They gave him a girl's name. This made Tom sad. When he grew up, he told everyone he was a boy. Now everyone calls him he and Tom. In other words, Tom is a girl who has declared herself to be a boy. The book makes it clear, via pronouns and other language, that Tom is a boy. Why? Because she says so. Tom knew she was a boy, quote, when he grew up, unquote, the book tells us. Judging by the pictures, this means by the ripe old age of 8 or 9. Here is Tom playing with dinosaurs. Children also meet Alex, who goes by they. Alex does not feel like just a boy or just a girl and doesn't feel comfortable being called he or she. So A House for Everyone normalizes the concept that one's sex has everything to do with what one feels and says, and nothing to do with one's actual body. And it begins the process of teaching children the terminology that goes along with this narrative. Words like gender identity, how you feel inside about whether you are a boy or a girl or something else. This is a definition that misleads children into believing there are more than 2 sexes. The lesson plan teaches children that everything they do is a statement, an expression. If a child puts on clothes for the day, they're not just putting on clothes, they're expressing something. If they do cartwheels, they're expressing something. And these are not just personality expressions, they're gender expressions. Children are asked to fill in information about each character in the book in a chart like this. It includes a place for their gender identity, such as girl or not boy or girl, with accompanying pronouns. Then they are to list activities, hairstyles, clothing, and the like in a row labeled gender expression. Are there things each character can do that are not considered gender expressions? Evidently not. Note that there is no row in the chart for sex.
Teachers are encouraged to read the book They, She, He, Me as a follow-up to A House for Everyone. It tells children that the way to personal fulfillment and indeed to society-wide liberation from gender oppression is by playing with pronouns. Children are urged to come up with their own pronouns, which can include words like she, he, they, ze, even tree. You can tell people that your pronoun is your name. There's no end to the fun children can have focusing on what their pronouns should be.
The gender identity book for 3rd grade, Is That for a Boy or a Girl?, starts out well. It shows males doing things that some might say only females do, and females doing things some might say only males do. In other words, it takes on the important topic of sexist stereotypes and shows how senseless and unjust they can be. Yes, girls can like bugs, dinosaurs, and other stereotypical boy things, and boys can like pink and sparkly things. Fighting sexist stereotypes makes sense. But with the introduction of a character named Morgan, the book leaps from fighting subjective sexist stereotypes to its opposite, rejecting objective biological reality. Morgan's family makes a point of not telling anyone whether Morgan is a girl or a boy. We also meet a child who is upset at being asked to use the bathroom corresponding to their biological sex because they believe themselves to be the opposite sex. It does not flow logically from denouncing sexist stereotypes that one can and should reject the material reality of one's anatomy. Acknowledging and celebrating the sex of our bodies is entirely consistent with and integral to overcoming sexist stereotypes. The book Is That for a Boy or a Girl? Reinforces and expands gender identity vocabulary. Here's a list of words teachers are asked to put on the board: gender, biological sex, gender identity, gender role, stereotype, transgender. The lesson plan instructs the teacher to have each child create a book page about themselves, depicting their own gender expression. Again, notice that everyday likes, dislikes, activities, and clothing choices are cast as gender expressions rather than simply elements of personality. Children are encouraged to view themselves and everything they do as being tied to a gender label. Is That for a Boy or a Girl? Makes it clear that a person's self-perception must be treated as reality, even when doing so affects the rights of others. In this case, the rights of people to have sex-segregated private spaces like bathrooms and locker rooms. The child who wants to use the bathroom of the opposite sex laments, "At home, I just use the bathroom. There's no upset or drama or doom. Like there is when I go to a store or to school and people act like I'm trying to fool them when I push open the right one for me. They say I'm mistaken. How could that be? I'm the expert. I'm in my own body. Just let me pee. No need to get snotty." Note the subterfuge. "I just want to pee" evokes an image of absolute exclusion, of being denied access to all bathrooms in the building. The reality is much less drastic. The child is simply being asked to use the sex-segregated space consistent with their biological sex. There are reasons that sex-segregated bathrooms and locker rooms exist. There are implications for the other people when sex segregation is abandoned, including intense discomfort for many. But none of those realities are mentioned here. The book takes a clear position. It maintains that females have no right to exclude males from their private spaces, and vice versa. This position does not flow logically from the book's opening argument against sex stereotyping. In fact, it undermines it. Note that the book is not calling for ending sex segregation in spaces where people want sex-based privacy. Spaces like bathrooms, locker rooms, prisons, hospital wards, abuse shelters. No, it is teaching children that where sex-segregated spaces exist, any individual who feels like they're the relevant sex must be allowed in, regardless of their actual sex.
In the 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, teachers read "It Feels Good to Be Yourself" to their classes. This further normalizes the idea that one's sex has nothing to do with one's physical body, and it further immerses children in the terminology of this narrative. School children are introduced to Ruthie, who is, quote, a transgender girl. That means when she was born, everyone thought she was a boy, until she grew a little older, old enough to tell everyone that she's actually a girl. Girl is Ruthie's gender identity. Just to be clear, for those new to this issue, Ruthie is a boy who thinks of himself as a girl. Xavier is Ruthie's brother. He's labeled a cisgender boy. This means he doesn't deny that he's a boy. The book then introduces Ruthie's friend Alex, who is said to be both a boy and a girl. Again, just to be clear, Alex is a girl. Her sex remains constant even as her thinking changes. And there's Alex's friend, JJ, who is neither a boy nor a girl. Alex and JJ, the book explains, are both non-binary. It explains that some kids feel that their gender identity isn't always the same. It changes with time. The book then offers this interpretation of what happens at birth. See, when you are born, you couldn't tell people who you were or how you felt. They looked at you and made a guess. Maybe they got it right, maybe they got it wrong. What a baby's body looks like when they're born can be a clue to what the baby's gender will be, but not always, the book tells us. Note that the babies in these drawings are all wearing diapers. This hides the inconvenient detail of their actual anatomy, which the book treats as completely irrelevant. Children are taught that doctors and others guess each baby's sex. There's no discussion of how the so-called guess is made.
The book then talks directly to the children in the classroom. You might feel like a boy. You might feel like a girl. You might feel like both boy and girl, or like neither. You might feel like your gender changes from day to day or from year to year. You might feel that none of these words describe you perfectly. You might not be sure yet. Maybe you're still figuring it out. The clear implication of these statements is that figuring out your gender identity is a valuable use of time and energy. And how do you determine what your gender identity is? From the murky reasoning presented in the book, apparently what you like to wear and do has something to do with it. And apparently there's some connection between your likes and dislikes and what your sex is, because those likes and dislikes might not match the sex observed for you at birth. In that case, they reason, the doctors got your sex wrong, which we're told happens all the time. Moreover, what you see and feel each day as you live in your body, that's not important or even real. Sex isn't important or even real. What is important and real, we're told, is figuring out which gender identity label to take on and which pronouns to insist others use for you. In other words, the schools are teaching children that material reality doesn't exist. We each have a gender identity, something defined by the sexist stereotypes schools claim to be dispelling. That identity is remarkably similar to religious concepts like the soul, floating separate from our bodies. Lesson plans tell teachers to read the book twice, and during the second reading to have children fill in slips of paper for each character. When I was born, I was assigned blank at birth. As I grew older, I realized that I am blank. When people talk about me, they should use the pronouns blank. The children are then made to produce gender identity maps for each character and spend time discussing those maps. While schools aren't allowed to teach astrology, and they don't have children map out their astrological signs or analyze how star alignment will shape their futures, they do require children to learn gender identity terminology, which has no basis in science. Your feelings about your gender are real, the book tells children. Listen to your heart. This loaded passage assumes that children have feelings about their gender. Then comes a particularly twisted ploy. The book asks, "It feels good to be yourself, doesn't it?" But children who embrace gender identities that don't fit with their biology are literally disassociating from their bodies. They are treating a big part of themselves, their actual physical bodies, as something to be ignored, denounced, or even chemically and surgically altered. According to the book, rejecting your body is synonymous with feeling good to be yourself. Here's the list of words children are taught as part of this lesson. Notice the inclusion of the term intersex. Gender identity and intersex are two very different things, and there are no intersex children in this book. Based on the inadequate definition provided here, many children will assume that trans-identifying people have intersex conditions, which is almost never the case. There's more information about intersex conditions and the misrepresentation and hijacking of these by some transactivists in the links section. It feels good to be yourself teaches children that it's important to use whatever pronouns people request. Why is it important to use the pronoun that matched someone's gender identity? Teachers ask their pupils. How should a child who does not want to lie about someone else's sex handle this loaded question? There is also an emphasis in the lesson on teaching children that good people and good families always go along with whatever children say about their sex. When children reject their sex, when they seek to transition to another sex, the only loving option for families is to say, "That's great," or so children are led to believe. Teachers ask their students, as children grow older, how can parents respect their choices about their gender identity? They tell students to focus on how the families in this book treat their children, describe the ways they show support for their children. What do you see them doing in the book? Here's what children see. Every single family member in the book immediately, enthusiastically, and unequivocally goes along with whatever the child says. When 5-year-old Ruthie tells his family he's a girl, they instantly agree. Oops, Ruthie was a girl all along. They just didn't know it at first. It Feels Good to Be Yourself lists groups like Gender Spectrum and Human Rights Campaign as resources parents and teachers can consult. These groups are gender identity ideology groups that aggressively denounce anyone who challenges their doctrine. Seattle schools never provide links to groups with different perspectives. They don't share the story of Lily Maynard, for example, a mother who lovingly persuaded her daughter to refrain from altering her body, an outcome for which her adult daughter is now grateful. It Feels Good to Be Yourself and the accompanying lesson plan cast loving parents like Maynard as ill-informed, disrespectful, and harmful to children. Nothing could be further from the truth.
In 4th grade, children are read I Am Jazz. This book steps things up, shifting from teddy bears and fictional characters to a real live human being, a celebrity with a TV reality show and a massive media presence. I Am Jazz features an appealing little boy who believes himself to be a girl. For as long as I can remember, my favorite color has been pink, Jazz says, on a page possibly intended to provide evidence that Jazz is female, evoking the sexist stereotype that only girls like pink. I have a girl brain in a boy body, explains Jazz, presenting a wildly unscientific notion to school children as if it were scientific fact. This is called transgender, Jazz says. I was born this way. Jazz's parents agree that their son is actually their daughter. They tell everyone to call Jazz she, and they let Jazz do things previously forbidden. He can now have long hair and become a cheerleader. Thus, only by claiming to be the other sex does Jazz escape oppressive, sexist stereotyping. Jazz is initially told to do sports with the boys, but ultimately is allowed on the girls' team. Notice what the reference to Jazz's sports activities in elementary school accomplishes. It subtly conveys that males in female sports is a great and liberating thing. Meanwhile, it renders invisible the feelings and concerns of those who don't like the idea. Jazz is presented to school children as the picture of health and self-realization. Completely missing from school materials is any mention of the harrowing realities of Jazz's medical transition, including complications and extreme pain associated with removing his penis. Problems like infertility, disruption of brain development, bone density loss, the inability to have orgasms, and increased risk of heart attacks and strokes aren't mentioned. The stories of those who desist and detransition from trans identities are never shared.
In 5th grade, children are read the book, Red, a Crayon's Story. We meet a crayon that is obviously blue, but wrapped in red paper. As one would expect, this blue crayon can only color things blue. But everyone ignores his claims of being blue and asks him to color things red based on his wrapping. Finally, he meets a friend who honors his blueness and has him color things blue. At last, everyone realizes he is blue, and he lives happily ever after. Children's sympathies are naturally drawn to the poor blue crayon misclassified as red, and then they are told that a trans-identifying boy is exactly the same as the blue crayon. He's really a she forced to be a he. In reality, it makes more sense to compare a boy who identifies as a girl to a blue crayon with a red wrapper that insists it is red. The trans-identifying boy, and everyone who affirms his trans identity, are focusing on the wrapping and denying the reality of his actual body. There are differences between what a male body can do and what a female body can do, how those bodies react to medications and the illnesses they develop, how they fare in sports competitions, and more. These realities don't go away, no matter how hard trans-identifying people insist, based on superficial wrapping, that they are the opposite sex.
In late elementary school, Seattle's sex education program kicks in. It's called FLASH, which stands for Family, Life, and Sexual Health. FLASH materials for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders teach about puberty, human reproductive anatomy, and sexual reproduction. In middle and high school, students learn more about those topics and also have units specifically addressing gender identity. This note from the elementary school curriculum provides important context for all FLASH lessons from elementary school through high school. You may notice language throughout the lesson that seems less familiar, using the pronoun they instead of her or him, and referring to someone with a vulva versus girl or woman. This is intended to make the curriculum more inclusive of all genders and gender identities. Yes, it really does say that. The school district shuns clear, vital scientific terms like woman and girl in favor of cumbersome elliptical expressions like people with vulvas. However, in this lesson, the terms male and female are used intentionally to make the content accessible for elementary age students. In other words, they'd love to get rid of even the terms male and female as well, but for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, they feel forced to still use those. While we use the term male and female when referring to particular anatomy, the school district notes, It's important to remember that someone can have a penis even if they don't identify as a boy, or a vulva even if they don't identify as a girl. In other words, the schools are teaching children that men have vulvas too. It isn't just women who do, and women can have penises. One's physical body is irrelevant to one's sex, and there are other sexes besides males and females. This is shockingly redolent of intelligent design beliefs that were passed off as science and biology curriculum for a time. In that case, as with gender ideology today, pseudo-religious philosophizing was substituted for the material, fact-based science humanity has fought so hard to elevate since the Enlightenment.
Now, the elementary school unit on reproductive systems, as updated in 2011, does in fact include language like woman, girl, man, and boy. They did not label this diagram with a word indicating sex, like woman or female, nor did they label this one as man or male, but at least the script used by teachers for this lesson uses those words. And the script does clearly explain how each sex is affected differently by puberty. This is consistent with the introductory note we reviewed. At least in the past, Flash authors felt forced by the learning style of elementary students to use this approach. In 2020, however, the school district made a film entitled Puberty in You, which is now shown in elementary schools. This film eliminates the words woman and man, sacrificing accuracy and clarity in the process. The film opens by explaining,
puberty is the time when kids start becoming adults, and it happens to people who identify as boys, girls, neither, both, or transgender. This video is for all people.
This teaches children that there are more sexes than just boy and girl. It also insinuates that there's something special in this video for children who don't identify with their sex. What could that be? Is there information about some special kind of puberty those kids go through? No, that's not it, because children always go through the puberty of their actual sex, not the sex they believe themselves to be. Some children do take puberty blockers, drugs that halt puberty. Does this video provide special information for them? Does it explain how their reproductive organs will be stunted, how bone and brain development and other maturation processes will be disrupted? No, there's not a word about any of that in this video. The thing that is different about this video, as compared to other puberty videos, is the nearly complete erasure of sex-based terminology. In a video that purports to teach about sexual anatomy, sexual reproduction, and sexual maturation. The Puberty in You video uses the term female once and only once.
This is a diagram of the reproductive system of a person who was assigned female at birth.
This tells children that the body they are looking at isn't necessarily female. No, this body belongs to someone who has been assigned female at birth, but who may identify as a male, in which case this diagram depicts a male body. The Seattle schools are telling children that female sexual anatomy, such as the uterus and ovaries, the vagina and fallopian tubes, could just as likely be in the body of a boy as a girl. The same goes for the word male. It's used only once.
This diagram is of the reproductive system of a person who was assigned male at birth.
The Puberty in You film never uses the words woman, man, girl, or boy. Not even once. It never uses the pronouns she or he. Body parts specific to each sex are presented as disembodied anatomical structures that could be in either sex. The vagina is one of 3 openings. These 2 structures are called testicles. They're inside a sac called the scrotum. Physical experiences specific to each sex are described as if they are equally possible in males and females. The video talks about how people menstruate, for example. It's not women who menstruate, it's people, which apparently includes men. Similarly, ejaculations can happen when a person is sleeping. In other words, both men and women have ejaculations. The film talks about puberty in terms that are general, and it doesn't delineate which things happen to girls and which to boys.
People's body shape changes too. It goes from being straight like a kid to having wider shoulders or hips, more like an adult. Our voices get deeper, and some kids' voices get much deeper, and when that happens quickly, their voices might crack or make squeaking sounds sometimes when they talk.
No mention is made of the fact that it is girls who will experience hips widening, and it is boys whose voices may crack and squeak. In the end, girls and boys watching this film may have no idea as to which body parts, which physical changes, and which functions, like menstruation and erections, relate to them. Moreover, if children claim trans or non-binary identities, they may even believe that the changes they will undergo during puberty are determined by their imagined sex rather than their actual bodies.
In the flash units on the reproductive system and pregnancy for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, the scripts given to teachers are almost completely devoid of terms like man, woman, male, female, she, and he. Here's the script for discussing female anatomy in the middle school flash curriculum. It uses the term woman here. This is a picture of the reproductive organs that are on the inside of someone's body. These are the parts that women usually have in their bodies. This is one of only 2 uses of the term woman in the script. Further down it says, the woman could use a hormonal birth control method. But we strongly suspect that this second use of woman is an editing error that the gender identity censors missed. The rest of the script painstakingly avoids the term woman, saying things like a person with ovaries and referring to symptoms that might let someone know they are pregnant, or talking about when someone gives birth to a baby. Notice that the diagram, as in earlier grades, is not labeled with the word woman or female. Female sexual anatomy is discussed as disembodied structures that could just as easily exist in a man as in a woman, just like in the video shown to 5th graders. This is the uterus. It is where a pregnancy would grow if a person was pregnant.
The same approach is used when the male reproductive system is discussed. Here's the one and only use of the word man. This is a picture of the reproductive organs that are in the inside of someone's body. These are the parts that men usually have in their bodies. The rest of the script uses phrases like, when a person ejaculates, and a person could wear a condom on the penis while having sex. It discusses parts of the male reproductive system as disembodied anatomy that could just as easily be found in a woman as in a man. The terms woman and man are not only largely omitted from the middle school materials, they are also never defined. In a unit on human sexual reproduction, even the terms male and female are almost entirely avoided.
And nowhere is it plainly stated that there needs to be a man and a woman for a baby to be created. The schools are driving home the primary doctrine of gender ideologists. What sex you are has nothing to do with the body you have. If you are a male, but you say you're a woman, well then by God you are a woman. Your penis is a female organ. And if you are a female, but say you're male, then by God you are a man. And this establishes that men can gestate and give birth.
All of this parallels the erasure of terms like woman and man throughout society as gender identity ideology spreads. Manufacturers of tampons and sanitary pads have taken the word woman off their packaging. Those products are now for people who menstruate. Healthcare institutions call upon people with cervixes to get pap smears instead of calling upon women to do so. Let us hope that female students in our schools are able to figure out that they are the ones with cervixes, a fact that vast numbers of adult women don't understand. Let us hope that these female students will understand that as women, regardless of their so-called gender identity, they need to get screened to reduce the chance of dying of cervical cancer. Oddly, the scripts for teachers on reproductive systems and pregnancy in the flash units for high schools use the old-fashioned language. There are terms like men, women, male, female, she and he all over the place. It's likely that the gender identity censors just haven't gotten around to editing those materials yet. The flash curriculum also include units specifically on gender identity. There's one set of these lessons for students in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and another for high school students. These build on the extensive groundwork laid by elementary school teachers as they read the books and used the lesson plans we reviewed earlier. With the flash curriculum, students are taught various tenets of gender identity ideology. Everyone has a gender identity. The two sexes, female and male, are examples of gender identity. In other words, gender and sex are interchangeable terms. Doctors may label a child male or female, but their real gender, i.e. their real sex, is determined by what that person, quote, knows in their heart. People generally know their identity, boy, girl, both, neither, somewhere in between, before they start kindergarten. Gender identity is innate and cannot be changed. All gender identities have existed throughout history, and so on and so forth. These and other assertions about gender and sex are presented to students as if they were facts, but they're not. They're beliefs.
Teachers use online videos produced by amaze.org as part of gender identity education. These reiterate the basic tenets of gender ideology, and they encourage children to spend time figuring out gender identities and fixating on gender expression, especially via clothing choice. Take the video Expressing Myself My Way, for example. One by one, cartoon characters go into dressing rooms as catchy music plays. Each comes out expressing their gender through their clothing choices.
Darla and Charles, one girl and one boy. They go into their changing rooms. Charles is feeling coy. Others are thrilled with the look, but Charles is quite unhappy. Let's try this again. Yeah, this is snappy. Some are confused. They just don't understand. Charles, now Charlotte is certain. Ariana's her biggest fan. Some might keep their distance, but others will come around. Come on over, Darla. Show us what you found. Darla presents an outfit. The new name is Darren. Now everything feels right. The person within he's sharing.
After each child in this video makes their gender expression decision, selfies are taken on cell phones and posted online, and the likes pour in. The flash curriculum expands the terminology students are to master. Words like cisgender and transgender and gender identity. Check out the links in the description for in-depth discussion of the circular nature and inconsistency of these definitions. For now, here are a couple of the definitions children learn. From the middle school curriculum, there's the word female. It is defined as someone who identifies as a woman. In other words, being female has nothing to do with your body. It's a matter of feelings, of identifying. The key word in this definition, woman, is not defined. But a woman, according to the dictionary, is an adult human female. So a female is someone who identifies as a woman, which is defined as a female. That's rather circular, to say the least.
Here's another term from the high school curriculum, sexual orientation, which is said to be determined by whether a person is attracted to the same gender, another gender, or all genders. Note the huge change here. Instead of lesbians and gays being same-sex attracted, they are said to be same-gender attracted. In the real world, this definition is being used to denounce lesbian and gays as transphobic if they don't want to be involved with people of the opposite sex. Lesbians who reject the advances of men who claim to be women, for example, are told that they need to get over their so-called genital fixations. They need to become comfortable with male genitalia. This is homophobia, plain and simple. The concept of gender identity is combined with sexual orientation, and the two are taught as part of a combined flash unit. These units briefly lay out the definitions of each, but beyond that, these concepts are presented as an inseparable, closely connected duo. School children are asked questions like, which of the following are ways to show respect to a person whose gender identity or sexual orientation is different from yours? High school students watch a video about a boy who disses a gay student, but the lesson plan uses that video to prompt discussion about gender identity as well as sexual orientation without any clarification as to distinctions between the two. Teachers are told that, quote, being LGBT is not a pathology and does not require treatment, unquote. But the American Psychological Association statement they rely on refers solely to homosexuality, not transgenderism. All of this is part of how gender identity ideology has worked its way into the schools and other institutions so swiftly and easily. By hitching this ideology to the star of gay rights, activists have bought themselves an undeserved aura of civil rights authenticity. They have cast themselves as beyond questioning, labeling those who do question as bigots to be immediately canceled. But gender identity and sexual orientation are very different things. Being gay doesn't entail denying the physical reality of one's body, nor does it entail drug and surgery-induced changes to that body. It doesn't put children on a path to invasive, uncontrolled medical experimentation with lifelong adverse impacts. It doesn't demand that others forfeit language, sex-based rights, and material reality. Ironically, gender identity ideology is undercutting gay rights. As noted earlier, under the guise of gender ideology, gays are being pressured to have sex with members of the opposite sex. In addition, many see the transing of children as conversion therapy for gays. There's strong evidence that a substantial percentage of children who transition would realize they are gay if allowed to go through puberty. Groups like LGBT Alliance have formed in countries around the world to defend gay rights from attacks, including those perpetrated by gender identity activists. They insist, quote, homosexuality is same-sex attraction. Biological sex is real. Sex is binary, not a spectrum. Gender is a social construct. Unfortunately, schools don't include LGBT Alliance or similar groups in lists of resources provided to students, families, and teachers.
The Gender Identity Flash curriculum teaches that the only appropriate response to transgender and non-binary identifying people is to treat their self-perceptions as valid. Children are taught that we all have multiple identities, and each of these are automatically worthy of pride and external validation. No matter when a person's identity develops, or whether or not they choose it, it's important for people to feel proud of who they are. This idea is presented without nuance. Must we agree with an anorexic girl that she is fat? Must we validate the self-perceptions of a middle-aged man who believes himself to be a young girl? What about white people who identify as black? Children are told that it's important to respectfully use whatever words and pronouns people ask them to use. Never mind that doing so renders key words like boy, girl, man, and woman meaningless.
As schools allow trans-identifying males to play in women's sports, as they open up locker rooms and bathrooms to members of the opposite sex with trans or non-binary identities, the curriculum steers children away from questioning these moves. On the matter of women's sports, for example, high school flash materials encourage students to contact the so-called Women's Sports Foundation. This organization believes trans-identifying males are literally women to be welcomed into women's sports. School materials make no mention of numerous experts and fact-based websites that have a very different perspective. Those resources document the clear dominance of male athletes over female athletes in competitive sports, the physiological basis for that dominance, and the large number of women who have already been denied trophies, records, and more by trans-identifying males. If students say things like, "Boys are better at sports than girls," teachers are armed with this response from the Human Rights Campaign, a gender ideology group. "Some boys are good at sports and some are not. Some girls are good at sports and some are not. All kids have different things they are good at." These statements are true, of course, but highly misleading. They fail to address the heart of the issue, competitive sports, and the level playing field in those sports that women fought so hard to establish. There is no doubt whatsoever that top male athletes outperform top female athletes in most sports, consistently and dramatically. Women have no chance to win or even participate in many sports if they do not have sex-segregated women-only teams. But teachers are urged to divert attention away from biological realities and ignore their impact on women's rights.
Sending students to a gender identity-infused resource on sports issues is part and parcel of the overall approach taken with the Flash Gender Identity curriculum. Students are referred only to those who promote gender identity ideology, never to those who challenge it. This group hosts teen chat rooms, which ban so-called hate speech and transphobia. Such bans are almost always used by organizations to prohibit all comments or questions that challenge gender identity ideology, no matter how politely worded, no matter how factually based. None of the groups on this resource sheet for middle schoolers will provide alternative perspectives and data.
The Flash curriculum works hard to make sure children don't receive any information that challenges gender identity ideology. It also paints an unappealing picture of anyone who questions that ideology. The Amaze.org video, "My Friend is Transgender," shown to middle schoolers, for example, features a guy named Jim. Jim brags about having a hot girlfriend, Cassie, and mentions that Cassie sees the world in ways he doesn't understand. When Cassie reveals that she's buying girls' clothes for their mutual friend Glenn, secretly Glenda, Jim is shocked. He angrily declares that if you have a penis, you're a guy, but he doesn't articulate the science behind that statement. He also declares that he's not going to be Glenn's friend anymore. In fact, he's never going to talk to Glenn again. Ultimately, when Glenn seeks him out, Jim relents, acknowledging that there's much he doesn't understand about these issues. While Jim is presented as an ignorant, bigoted oaf who shoots from the hip and threatens to be mean to Glenn, Cassie is pictured as thoughtful, informed, and compassionate. She patiently tells Jim all about gender identity, laying out its tenets articulately. Jim has no comeback because he has not done his homework and is unable to challenge gender identity from a science-based, compassionate place. Unflattering caricatures like Jim are the only view schools give children of people who question gender identity ideology. When schools embrace a child's rejection of their sex, they are explicitly endorsing and implementing one particular therapeutic response to children who are uncomfortable with their bodies: affirmation. They are declaring that there is only one possible reason that a person will reject their sex. He or she has truly been born in the wrong body, and they truly are whatever sex they believe themselves to be. Moreover, schools are promoting the dangerous and destructive idea that even mentioning that there may be other reasons for a child's disassociation with their body, sexual abuse, for example, is bigotry. By affirming each child's gender identity, teachers are making therapeutic decisions, even though they lack professional expertise to do so, and they are not familiar with the details of each child's experiences and circumstances. Many express concern that children will commit suicide if they aren't affirmed. an idea put forth by gender ideology groups based on the shoddiest of evidence, but treated as fact by the schools without any meaningful review. Some data indicates that affirmation may increase the risk of self-harm. Schools don't tell children or teachers about the physical harm associated with puberty-blocking drugs, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries that trans-identifying children and adults go through. They don't acknowledge significant rates of mental illness, sexual trauma, and autism among children who want to transition, nor do they acknowledge clear documentation that gender dysphoric children who go through puberty overwhelmingly come to accept their bodies.
Schools also ignore large numbers of people who detransition. These are individuals who transitioned chemically or surgically and then deeply regretted that decision. Detransitioners choose to embrace their actual sex. Then they cope with the irreversible damage done to their bodies. Recently, detransitioner Kira Bell successfully sued the UK's main gender clinic. Ms. Bell is angry that adults affirmed her misguided belief as a teen that she was a man, leading to irreversible damage to her body. See links related to her experience in the description. Some gender identity activists claim that those who desist or detransition never really were transgender in the first place. Whether or not that is true, the existence of these individuals makes it clear that a policy of unquestioning affirmation in the schools is irresponsible. Should children who reject their sex be treated with compassion and respect? Absolutely. Should schools teach their students to be friendly and kind to all of their peers and that bullying is wrong? Absolutely. But these things can be done without treating misperceptions of individual children as real and without promoting an ideology that is at odds with material reality.
The materials we've reviewed in this video were obtained via a public disclosure request to the Seattle schools and a review of relevant websites. But it's difficult to track fully what's being taught in the name of gender identity in our schools. It's likely that the information we obtained only scratches the surface. Here is a letter, for example, sent in November of 2020 by the school principal to all families at a particular Seattle elementary school. The letter notes definitions we will use as a school, which declares that adults guess a baby's gender, by which they mean sex, and often get it wrong. What sex people are is determined by a feeling they know deep down within themselves. When you are born, babies can't tell people what their gender is, so doctors and family members look at the baby's body to determine their gender. What a baby's body looks like can be a clue to their gender, but not always. Sometimes the adults guess correctly just by looking. These people are usually called cisgender. Sometimes that gender label doesn't match up with how they feel inside. When someone's gender doesn't match to what a doctor decided based on their body, they are transgender. Only that person can tell what gender they are. It's a feeling they know deep down within themselves. Whether you are transgender or cisgender, or neither, non-binary, or a mix of more than one gender, you alone can tell what your gender identity is. This is the kind of directive schools are sending out to families. The letter provides links to all sorts of gender identity lessons for teachers to use on top of all the other gender identity materials already mentioned. It refers parents and others to many different organizations and individuals, all of whom push gender identity ideology. Who knows how many mailings like this are sent to teachers and parents each year?
So, to summarize, here is a partial list of the messages being delivered to children from kindergarten through 12th grade in the public schools. Sex has nothing to do with what body you have. It's a feeling. Doctors guess your sex at birth and often get it wrong. Some people are born in the wrong body. Any male who says he's female is indeed female, entitled to female spaces, rights, scholarships, sports venues, and more. Any female who says she's male is indeed male, entitled to male spaces and more. Men can have babies. Women can have penises and be fathers. Lesbians who insist on same-sex partners, rejecting men who identify as women, are transphobic. Gay men who reject women who identify as men are transphobic as well. There are more than two sexes. In fact, sex is a spectrum. Gender identity is a scientifically established fact, and everyone has a gender identity.
Those who accept their sex as real and relevant are called cisgender people. Thus, women are a subset of our own sex. That sex is now composed of women and also men who say they're women. Men are a subset of their own sex as well. It is a valuable use of children's time to memorize gender identity terminology, to view everything people do as an expression of gender, to figure out their own gender identities, and to ponder which pronouns to use. There can be no other cause of a child rejecting his or her physical body beyond being born in the wrong body. Any questioning, any counseling, any sharing of information on the health risks associated with blocking puberty, taking cross-sex hormones, and having surgery to remove or alter sexual organs must be viewed as unacceptable. The role of the school and everyone in it is to immediately and unquestioningly agree that any boy claiming to be a girl is a girl, and any girl claiming to be a boy is a boy. This means that males are entitled to female-only spaces in sports, and that males are no longer entitled to male-only spaces. Each and every one of these messages being delivered to children from kindergarten onward is wrong.
It should be noted that the messages in children's lessons have also been incorporated in Seattle Public School policies. Countless other school districts around the U.S. and in other countries have adopted similar policies. Among other things, per official school policy, trans-identifying males can participate in women's sports. Trans-identifying males can use women's and girls' bathrooms and locker rooms. Trans-identifying females can use men's and boys' bathrooms and locker rooms. Teachers and other school staff are required to use whatever pronouns students request based on their gender identity. On overnight field trips, males who identify as females share sleeping accommodations with females.
We must fight the gender identity curriculum used in Seattle schools and elsewhere. Among other things, it provides children with scientifically and medically inaccurate information. It denies them basic information about biology and sex that they need and deserve. It teaches children that a quasi-religious concept is scientific fact. It promotes sexist stereotypes, undermines the rights of gays and lesbians, undermines children's critical thinking skills, compels speech, including false speech, undermines the sex-based rights and privacy of children. But the most important reason for fighting the school's gender identity curriculum is the terrible disservice it does to the growing number of children disassociating from their sexed bodies. The curriculum is based on an affirmation-only approach, which is not supported by evidence as efficacious or safe. Indeed, the schools are setting children on a path of harmful medicalization that has extreme, lifelong consequences.
Please watch for our future videos and publications and follow the links provided below. Also, join with us in fighting to end the travesty of gender identity education in the schools.